Thank you, Kira, and thanks to you for organizing this event. It's been wonderful for me to have reunions with folks that I expected to be here, as well as some that I didn't know would be here. Not only Furman connections, but I spent 17 years teaching at Davidson College, and there are a number of Davidson alums and former trustees here, as well as some time I spent at UVA, and I've enjoyed wahoo-wahing with some of you UVA alums, you Cavaliers. Some of you may be wondering about the origin of my name, David Shi, S-H-I. It's a very common Chinese name. Mine happens to be Scots-Irish, if you haven't guessed. When I first arrived at Davidson, a mythic professor who was a polymath, and he taught German and Greek and Latin and Old English, told me that in the 12th century in Britain, the letter combination SH was actually pronounced SK. So I have made a claim on the Isle of Skye. Now, I noticed in the program that I am listed as President Emeritus, a highfalutin term derived, as you may know, from two Latin words. The word E, meaning to leave, and meritus, meaning for good reason. There is a great hazard, of course, in being the final panelist on almost the last event of a two-day conference, in that all of the best things, the most insightful, the most powerful things I was going to say have already been said. So my challenge is to somehow say something fresh and meaningful, but I feel like what sailors say about the last ounce of beer at the bottom of the bottle: it's mostly spit. Now, I know that Dana meant no harm when he invited me to say whatever was on my mind at this occasion, but inviting a former college president to speak his or her mind can be a dangerous proposition indeed. Consider the example of Nicholas Cop, C-O-P, the 16th century president of the University of Paris, who said what was on his mind during the occasion of his inaugural address, and soon thereafter found himself literally fleeing for his life through the streets of the city, pursued by the members of the theology faculty, the divinity school. Now, I promise not to say anything so incendiary, but I worry about staying within my allotted 90 minutes. College presidents, you see, are notoriously long-winded. You may not be any wiser after listening to me, but you will be a great deal older. But I do admire the virtues of concision and succinct presentations. A few years ago, I sat in on a creative writing class at Furman where the students were writing short stories and poetry. And the professor came in and said, I want you to put away all of your materials and just take out a single sheet of paper and a pen. We're going to have a contest. And she explained that she wanted the students to write the shortest short story that included the following 4 elements: religion, royalty, sex, and mystery. What were the 4 elements? Religion, royalty, sex, and mystery. The students furiously started writing, and in about 10 minutes, the professor took up the papers. She shuffled through them. She said, "We have a winner." It read, "My God," said the Queen, "I'm pregnant. I wonder who did it." As you might know from your own experience, college presidents tend to be one of 2 types, either the historians or the ministers, those with the long memories or those with the long messages. I was trained as a historian, but I always yearned to be a minister. This ministerial reference reminds me of a sign I saw in front of a church in Greenville, a city that has more Baptists than people. The sign read, "If you're tired of sin, please come in." and some wag had scribbled underneath it, "If you're not yet tired of sin, call 987-6544. Did you get that number? Of course, our topic this session centers on the spiritual dimensions of conservation, and a wonderfully appropriate subject it is. "Let heaven and nature sing," proclaims the famous Christian hymn. And it's not coincidental that Western civilization has always viewed the Bible and nature as the two great texts to be studied and revered. Spirituality, of course, is a compelling yet elusive concept, for we cannot grasp the sacred. It's intangible and mysterious. We can only sense its presence and feel its power. As the letter to Hebrews affirms, faith is the belief in things not seen. Likewise, the ecological imagination includes the capacity to believe in what isn't obvious to our eyes. The skill of ecological analysis involves quieting our minds so that we can read between the lines. How rare it is in this supposedly postmodern world to sit absolutely still for an hour, not thinking, not even feeling, simply being in the presence of nature's majestic beauty and acknowledging its intrinsic worth and integrity, authenticity, and quiet majesty. At first, one notices the small things, the subtle changes as wind suddenly rustles a small space in the water, the amber color of still water over sand, or the reflection on the calm surface of a single tree. But little by little, it is the whole unified scene that kidnaps our awareness. And it is the silence itself that unifies the scene. One slides down deeper and deeper into contemplation. The experience is not ecstasy like that evoked by the shimmering light of lavender petals. It is more like prayer. Silent beauty beyond our understanding and beyond our uniqueness as individuals. A living presence for us that asks nothing of us except to be in its presence. As Kira mentioned, I'm a cultural historian by training. And during the 1980s, I wrote 2 books about the ideal of simple living and environmental stewardship in the American experience from the colonial period up to the 1980s. Today, I want to share some insights from those 2 books about spiritual ecology as an American ideal, both past and present. Of course, they're not uniquely American ideals. Every one of the world's great religions and philosophies promote simplicity of living. And those ancient ideals of simple living and spiritual ecology are directly related to what we call sustainability. For the accelerating destruction of the environment is largely driven by our insatiable craving for more. We're living in a material world, sang Madonna in the 1980s, and that is even more true today. By contrast, simplicity entails the recognition that God has provided a bountiful material world to us, not for our use and abuse and exploitation, but rather for us to act as stewards over. And that is perhaps what the author of Proverbs meant by saying that the true Christian needs only enough. Only enough. That is the essential formula for a simpler life. In actuality, in practice, simplicity includes a wide spectrum of life choices and lifestyles, for it involves walking the difficult path between too little and too much, what the New England Puritans call the middle way, so as to ensure that money and things never corrupt our higher priorities, such as our spiritual commitments and preserving the natural environment. In practice, living simply means living intentionally. It requires a deliberate ordering of daily priorities so as to distinguish each day between the necessary and the superfluous, the useful and the wasteful, the beautiful and the vulgar. The diverse individuals and groups that I featured in those books about simpler living were animated by many different motives, but religious and spiritual values have always inspired plain living and high thinking. The first peoples of North America viewed nature as the pantheistic embodiment of the gods. Likewise, many of the earliest European colonists, the Puritans, Quakers, Shakers, Moravians, Mennonites, and Amish, sought to lead lives of pious simplicity while treading lightly on the land. Other champions of simplicity during the 19th and 20th centuries, people such as Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, John Muir, John Burroughs, Aldo Leopold, Scott and Helen Nearing, and Annie Dillard, embraced different forms of spiritual ecology. Their love of nature was rooted in reverence, in a powerful sense of the sacred, like that which Stephen and Mary Evelyn and John Rashford have described so well. Nature has always, from day one, been the repository of much that we cannot explain or understand. And although different cultures over the centuries have attached different names to the energies animating nature, they all have, in one sense or another, invested nature with spiritual forces. Whether that natural energy, that life force, is called spirit or Tao, creator or God, or some other holy name, or no name at all, it doesn't matter, as long as we acknowledge that there is a spiritual dimension to the natural world. As Emerson once said in trying to explain what transcendentalism was, he said that words are signs of natural facts. Particular natural facts are symbols of particular spiritual facts. Nature, therefore, is the symbol of the Spirit. Likewise, Aldo Leopold, who belonged to no church and professed no traditional creed, regularly left his Wisconsin cabin in the 1930s to search for clues to the life spirit behind the cycles of nature, recording his daily observations in what became his classic book, A Sand County Almanac. Nature, he believed, provided daily evidence of the grandeur of God, and Leopold's writings overflow with the joyous sense of awe and wonder at the mystery and complexity of things, what he called the imponderable essence of life, which he found inexpressible in terms of contemporary science. Ethical action, he stressed, results from the respect and awe and joy that flows from the experience of such mystery. In her autobiography, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, Annie Dillard compared her house in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia to a spiritual hermitage, an anchor hole, she said, of her natural faith, from whence she could venture out to explore the neighborhood, view the landscape, to discover at least where it is that we have been so startlingly set down on this earth if we can't learn why or how some spiritual force has positioned us for good work. What Leopold and Dillard, Emerson and Thoreau discovered is that immersing ourselves in nature helps focus our thoughts on inward and outward realities that guide us toward a life that is more meaningful because it is more attuned to the spiritual dimensions of nature. Listen, a mature faith does not provide simple answers to the unknowable. It is what we do and who we are in the face of the unknowable. Hold that thought. If a picture's worth 1,000 words, then a story is worth a dozen sermons. My story for you today centers on the experience of John Muir, the celebrated naturalist and conservationist who inspired the creation of the Sierra Club. Muir, as you probably know, was a feisty Scotsman who at age 11 immigrated with his family from Scotland to Wisconsin. 1849, they arrived. There, he and his siblings labored day and night under the stern direction of their father, a farmer and hellfire Presbyterian minister, who regularly beat the children severely. Eventually, John Muir enrolled at the University of Wisconsin, where he excelled at botany, chemistry, and geology. The Civil War interrupted his education, and after the war, Muir began working at an Indiana wagon wheel factory, making wagon wheels, while struggling to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. What was his calling? He confessed in a diary that I'm troubled by melancholy and loneliness, as well as the pressure I feel of time upon my life to make that decision. He was now in his late 20s. Then in March of 1867, 2 years after the Civil War ended, he experienced an unexpected and traumatic transformation. While Muir was at work one day, a belt on the machine he was repairing ruptured and pierced his right eye on the edge of the cornea. He was blinded, and soon thereafter, his left eye also went dark through sympathetic nerve shock. Unable to see, he recalled that he wanted to die. My eyes closed forever on God's beauty. I am lost, he said in despair. Yet a few weeks later, after visiting an eye specialist, Muir learned that he might be able to see again if he took the unusual step of living for a month in complete darkness. He eagerly accepted his confinement. And finally, on a spring day in April, his bandages were removed and the windows were open, and lo and behold, he could see again. The resurrection of his sight overjoyed Muir, and it was as if he were seeing again for the first time through the innocent eyes of a child. The experience of losing and regaining his sight transformed Muir. He came to realize, as he said, that I was happiest when immersed in nature rather than working in a factory. So he resolved to be true to himself, quote unquote, and pursue his calling as a naturalist and a conservationist. His affliction, he wrote, drove me to the sweet fields. God has to nearly kill us sometimes to teach us hard lessons. So his resolution made, Muir set off on foot on a 1,000-mile pilgrimage from Indianapolis to the Florida Keys, carefully recording in a journal his observation of plant, animal, and human life. In 1868, his itch for sauntering unrelieved, he boarded a steamer in New York City and 2 months later arrived in California. He made his way to the Yosemite Valley, where he worked at a variety of part-time jobs that enabled him to spend most of his time hiking and camping in that magnificent valley, while writing dozens of newspaper and magazine articles promoting conservation. Muir's evangelical outlook was not religious, but it was spiritual. Like Thoreau, Muir was what I call a forest Christian, that characteristically American brand of pantheism. In the Bible, as you know, wilderness is typically depicted as either a sanctuary to which prophets flee from the persecution of tyrants, or else it is a purgatory through which chosen people wander, doing penance for their worshiping of false idols. For Muir, however, the untamed refuges of North America were both wilderness and promised land, and to be exiled there was not persecution, but a deliverance. Muir was a pilgrim in the pines, yet even when engaged in his solitary hikes, he was never alone. Muir said that he found in the Sierra Nevada woods a window opening to heaven, a mirror reflecting the Creator. To him, trees, waterfalls, squirrels, bears, and eagles were sparks of the divine soul. God and goodness always seem more accessible to him in nature than within human society. Muir wrote that everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul alike. His sense of a divine presence in the woods at times rose to the pitch of ecstasy. Once, during a ferocious storm, he climbed a Douglas fir 75 feet in the air to experience its dramatic swaying in the howling wind, screaming his joy for no one to hear except God. So by immersing himself in wilderness, Muir learned as much about himself as he did about nature. I went out for a walk, he wrote in his journal one evening, and finally concluded to stay out until sundown, for by going out, I found I was really going in. Of course, few of us experience that kind of transformational epiphany that John Muir felt after being blinded. More often than not, we choose our priorities not in some flash of illumination, but rather in the ordinary circumstances of living, being, and doing. How about you? What role does spirituality have in your commitment to conserving this special place? How many of us view environmental stewardship as a kind of religious calling or spiritual journey or expression of holiness? To what extent do we invest the Lowcountry's natural environment with sacred significance? To what extent is the Conservation League itself a communion of faith? Although Leopold frequently stressed that human beings, by their very nature, have a fundamental need to be part of communities of spiritual and ethical purpose that transcend the individual. There is a harmony between the land and the self, Leopold repeatedly insisted. In nature, we are necessarily part of a larger whole. All ethics, he declared, rest upon a single premise, that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. This is Leopold's holistic gospel, without the W. His spiritual ecology, he said, did not involve building roads into lovely country, but of building receptivity into the still unlovely human mind. Many of you have discovered this compelling truth. When you give yourself fully to sacred places, they tend to reciprocate. That is, the more one knows or comes to know and revere and preserve sacred places, the more one knows about themselves. Wherever that self-revelation comes from, in wildness, in beauty, in community, or God, we're called upon to use the healing energy of wildness to preserve the holiness of creation on behalf of all beings for all time. You no doubt recall the haunting lines from the Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby, "All the lonely people, where do they come from?" As Paul McCartney recognized, the modern world has been experiencing an epidemic of loneliness over the last 50 years. We all need to feel a part of a genuine community, a community of persons linked not merely by one kind of relationships like work or friendship or family, but by many interlocking kinds of connections, sort of like those enabled by the Coastal Conservation League. Caretaking and caregiving are the utmost spiritual and physical responsibilities of our time. And perhaps such a vital sense of stewardship is our sacred place in the web of life, providing at least part of the solution to the mystery of what we are. For, as the Hebrew book of Ecclesiastes says, "Behold God's creations, see how beautiful they are, how excellent they are, and see to it that you do not spoil and destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one to repair it after you." Thank you.
Thank you so much, David.